Hey, everybody, and welcome to Megashift today. I am thrilled to have Brian Douglas on the pod to talk about one of the biggest transformations happening in technology right now. And that is, of course, how developers work, how open source technology is evolving, and how AI is changing the very nature of building software itself. So, how are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, happy Monday, and yeah, just ready to get to work. But also, I'm going to chat with you before I go heads down.
Rock on, rock on. Yes, Monday, and we're already in March here. Spring. I feel like spring is around the corner.
Yeah,
It's poking its head, but we've
yeah. Did you
we've
guys
gotten.
even have spring in New York? Like it feels like you just got slammed.
Yeah, yeah. The trees, you can kind of see some of the buds, like not like spring buds, but they're like really early buds, and it's like there is some potential there for that spring. So yeah, just kind of getting into the swing of it this month. Thank you for joining us. So, just a little bit about your background, and I'm sure you can speak to it better than myself, but just for our listeners, Brian is a builder, a founder, and a longtime champion of developers. So, Brian is working on a new venture called the Paper Compute Company, which is building the foundational tools to help make AI agents safe, reliable, and manageable so they can be trusted with important jobs like on the web and building things. And we'll talk about what all that means. He most recently was working as the head of developer experience at continue.dev, where he was building out continuous AI and agentic workflows that allow AI to work in the background while you go on and do other things. So the AI is handling repetitive engineering tasks and just lets developers focus on high level thinking and creativity. So now you're working on this new AI venture to make things safer, and we'll unpack all that. Wow, what a story! What a story! So yeah, Brian, thanks so much. What are you building now at Paper Compute, and why does it matter in this moment?
Yeah, yeah. So we are building distributed systems for AI, specifically AI agents. And this is like, it's weird. Like a lot of the stuff I say, it's going to sound like a bunch of buzzwords, but like my background comes from like building developer tools. I built a company called Open Source. We sold to the Linux Foundation. I worked with the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is Kubernetes. So like I've got a lot of experience in like the actual distributed systems part. And what I found is like the AI world today doesn't. And so like spinning up a server and like spinning up a bunch of pods to then like have servers to run and distributed systems, et cetera, like that. Think of that, but for agents. So like I want to spin up an agent to look through my Gmail and identify things that are marked important and label things that should be archived and then shut down that agent. Like that in itself, a lot of what people are doing is like with your SDKs, you'll build a bunch of JavaScript or Python, you spin up the agent, you deploy it, and then you're done in an hour. But when the agent's done with its work, that agent still is running. So, like, what if you can control the agent to spin it down or pause it to not always have access to your Gmail and not have like a security hole into your to backdoor into your email? Because all this stuff is brand new. All the best practices are still being figured out. But you want to protect yourself, but still do like the stuff you want to get unlocked. And then the other world is like agents deploying agents as well, which is another world where I think we're like ready to start doing this, but like we're there's just a lot of questions on like what that means and like the security aspects of that. So that kind of like summarizes what we're doing, and we're doing it through two different products, which tapes is telemetry for agents product. So telemetry being just as you it sounds open tel. There's a lot of tools that do this and say they do this. Ours is open source first. It's today it's AGPL, but the focus is really it's a means to get that data and have a sort of best practice around that. The actual product that will hopefully be monetizing in the future is Stereos, which is an operating system for agents. So like tapes can play inside of Stereos, and you could record that data, do something with it eventually. But we're focused on the compliance. So like agent turns on the Stereos, what it has access to during with stereo playing, what it does like through API endpoints and MCP tool call and stuff like that. All that's being collected, but also you still have a place where you can actually have the agent do work. So that's like in a nutshell. Still working on the pitch. I could probably condense that into like a an elevator pitch, but TBD when I get to that point.
No, that's awesome. I love the naming, and thank you for that context. Yeah, it's really clever how the stereo is running inside, or tapes is running inside the stereo, and kind of unpacking that for the audience a bit, because different folks with different technical aptitude listen to this. So kind of the term agent, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard it. there's things like in ChatGPT, you can build a custom GPT and it will do that one thing in the ChatGPT environment. Then you have something like Claude Code, and it can be like running actually on your computer. And so taking a step back, like building a web app, doing a task like you just mentioned, like having something check your email and label it. Like, how do you interpret agents, or kind of how's the industry coalescing around the term agent?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because like when I was doing open source, like we had tab completion with like Copilot, and then we had ChatGPT, which was like eventually tool calling. So like the AI LMs can then call tools, which are these functions that are basically API endpoints, to do like these like bespoke interactions. So like when the agent is like the evolution of all that stuff of like agent already knows tool calling, already has access to MCPs, probably already has access to LLMs, and has some sort of like GPU or CPU compute. So it's all just bundled up into like a story to say agents will just do the one thing. So just like ChatGPT can have an agent inside of it, you could build an agent. And I think probably as a recent OpenClaw is probably the sort of the culmination of all the stuff into something that people can leverage and have a story to tell. Now, there's a bunch of these like OpenClaw clones and forks as well. But I guess what I'm getting at is like agents are just like a sort of like predetermined place that you could run automation and you could interact and have natural language conversations with, or you just have it run with no conversation. Like it already has a predetermined prompt that it runs on demand. So like my Gmail example, same prompt every Sunday, 2 hours. It should know how to like organize my Gmail. And then by Monday, it's like good to go.
Mhm.
So I think there's some like strong like vocabulary around this like these terms, but I think a lot of it gets kind of muddied because like some agents could have its own compute, some agents don't. Some agents are just like a markdown file with like what things should be called, and it gets run within a harness. And then like Claude Code would be considered a harness where it has access to all the LLM and the compute and the API calls, and then you just pass it in mark like your agent is the markdown files that you pass into it. So like there's a concept of sub agents, but yeah, it gets like super confusing. But like just understand that agents are just like a way to frame how you
Mhm.
interact with AI. And there's going to be a lot of different flavors of what type of agents you're talking about. But for
Mhm.
our sake, for the paper compute company, is like we're not in the weeds of like what an agent is and what type of agents you are. We're just providing the layer underneath, which is like where the agents, the sandbox the agent plays in.
Right, right.
With sandbox is also an overloaded term as well. So like to be very clear, we're not even a sandbox. We're the VM. We're the actual operating system underneath the sandbox, and that's
Mhm.
kind of where we sit within the entire tech stack.
Yeah, thank you for that. And kind of the analogy is like an agent can be like it's a computer program that's been given instructions or just decides its own instructions based on its objective, right?
Yeah.
And so, kind of as we think about that, it's like if there were somebody with a headset inside your computer, like just making decisions on your hardware and deciding how to allocate resources like compute or spin up an IP address, or basically just achieve its objective. Like it wants to achieve the objective at all costs. It's a computer program. It doesn't know right from wrong. It only knows the instructions, and it knows maybe all of the knowledge of the internet, right? And so I think it like with that analogy, I'd like to talk a little bit about more about your virtual machines and VMs, because like so basically, why do agents need isolation? Why does the infrastructure and the telemetry need to be there? It sounds like there can really be some risk if you just let a program run amok. And
Yeah.
so, what's kind of, um, I guess, level setting? Like, why is that sandboxing or isolating this bot, if you will, a strategic importance in 2026?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at the AI Native Con in Brooklyn
Hmm.
earlier this year about like the sort of continuous AI workflows and like the best
Hmm.
practices. And the analogy I gave in that talk was like giving a baby a Sharpie inside of a museum. So like I have a toddler, she's about 18 months. If I gave her a Sharpie and out of all I've got 3 kids, she's the one that would draw on the walls. The other two are pretty good. Like they don't draw on the stuff, but this is the one that's like, oh, marker? Sure, let's just go. Like, let's just draw on the couch and the wall and the table. So, like, I have to set up rules and I have to set up like constrictions of like, cool, you can have a Sharpie, but you're sitting in the high chair and you're drawing in the high chair while you're strapped in. Because at least the only stuff that you can touch is within arm's reach of the high chair. Or because like it is that bad. If I put her on the kitchen table, she might wander like I'm going to do something else. And she already wandered to the living room and like already drawing on the carpet. So when I talk about agents in the context of like you get an open claw you install on your Mac, it has access to your full file system and every program that's like there. And it like dangerously skips permissions is like part of its like ethos. So unless you tell it something that it can't touch, it's just going to be like, oh, well, I found the thing you're looking for, but also it's in the something else is in the way. Let me just delete it, or let me remove permissions, and like it will do stuff without instruction. It could sort of like figure things out. So the importance of like having like a constricted environment and sandbox, like with the VM, like the way we've approached stereos is like we're building specifically using Nix OS, but also on Linux to give it like a very constricted surface to sort of play within. And this is like where it gets kind of confusing because like we're the layer below sandboxes. Sandboxes are kind of like your SDK to the like let the agent know or where the hardest to go to plug in and how to have access to the cloud. But you just have a constricted environment that you also provide the tapes telemetry. So like you can only do certain things, but then also you could record what gets done so that you could also have like context of like what happens. And like the best example that we have right now is like AI researcher at Meta, specifically in safety, was using OpenClaw and their email on a separate device, so a Mac Mini, and it started deleting emails. And the only way to stop it was to unplug the Mac Mini, so it would stop compute because I couldn't like SSH in the right thing to get it unblocked or whatever the story was. But think of that. So instead of trying to unplug the Mac Mini, you just have a quick command of like we call it master blasts is our CLI, so our orchestration for pulling up agents and spinning them down. You can just like MB down inside that for that sandbox or within the VM, and then that should stop the process. And then if you have telemetry, you can go figure out what happened. How did you get to that point? But that's kind of the sell the story.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, like I think I saw that headline and someone had said like, oh, if only they had a slash command that was like slash stop, and just being able to like this agent was kind of running amok. And so it's really interesting that, you know, that's showing up in the day-to-day workflows in enterprises at a company like Meta, or, you know, folks are like really using these and it's kind of bleeding edge. So it's great to have some infrastructure like coalescing around it. And so like looking at the stack and you kind of it's a dev tool, so folks are using might need to know Linux, they need to know a little bit about telemetry to actually make sense of it. So who is this for right now, and what shifts are you seeing in the market that again make this like necessary?
Yeah, so out the gate, John, my co-founder, we've been chatting about this over the holidays, like the week of Christmas, and our target like audience is really platform engineers, folks who are spinning up servers, spinning up, basically have the need to spin up a few agents to like solve a problem. I think recently Notion, they announced last year their Notion agents platform, but I just recently had some extra updates, so like advancements of features. So I imagine you have like Notion going through your database, your Notion databases or your docs, and like finding internal documentation and preparation for like board meetings or talks and chats with teams and stuff like that. So, but the idea is like doing that at scale. So like if I'm giving this access and privilege information, like you would normally want like compliance. So like anything like SOC 2 and like knowing like who's checking out this data and who's has access to it at any time. If an agent has access to it, you should also be like having compliance and telemetry around that. So we have been targeting specifically like platform engineering teams and like SREs, but I've recently talked to founders about like that Gmail example in that demo, which this is not a public URL, but papercompute/Gmail is actually a demo of me walking through that experience of like you spinning up a VM to basically go connect to your OAuth to your Gmail and then organize your Gmail and then spin it down when it's done.
Yeah, wow. And so does your do you all are you opinionated about which virtual machines can run on your these instances, or kind of what choices do the platform teams end up making versus what you all provide? And
Yeah, so we are opinionated in that we've built our own essentially. So Stereos is a VM. So like think of this like Vagrant is probably the best sort of correlation to like what we're doing and like what's already out there in market. So it's a basically a box that you spin up. You can spin up local on your MacBook or your Linux machine. Actually, I've never tried Windows, so I don't think Windows is actually working. But open to issue if you wanted Windows to work. But yeah, you spin up a VM, and then you could spin up a VM inside of VMs if you wanted to. It could be turtles all the way down, but the value is like our opinion is that Linux is probably not going away. So a lot of stuff is built on top of Linux, and a lot of stuff in the cloud. Kubernetes is probably not going away. A lot of stuff that's orchestrated in the cloud, like to orchestrate clouds, that exists. So folks who already have an understanding of this existence of those products will probably like gravitate to using what we have in market. But the goal with being that we will have something that like the prosumer or the sort of end user can sort of spin up and have a similar story. But today, right now, it's a bit of a technical product for folks.
For sure. Pivoting to this from your work at continue.dev, which is all about these agents running when the developer's sleeping or when you go get a coffee, and like just these agents are now getting more sophisticated. They're running longer. The sessions with Claude Code or Claude Bot, OpenClaw are longer. So, kind of taking a step back, like you've had a really interesting career working with great developers, being a developer yourself. So you were actually GitHub's first developer advocate. Is that right?
That is correct. First
Okay.
with the title, yes.
First with the title, right? I know it's like everybody's advocating for developers over at GitHub, but developer advocate, that's like a really cool hybrid role in the sense that like it calls on a lot of different skills, being able to code yourself, do production code, work with developers, understand pain points. So what was that experience like? And being GitHub's first developer advocate and spending quite a few years there, what did that experience teach you about open source and platform thinking and kind of responsibility at scale?
Yeah. So like I joined 2018. So if to put the time frame, like this is pre-Microsoft acquisition. This is also like before GitHub Actions had shipped. So the majority of the product was like just reviewing pull requests, getting your repos up, doing a lot of collaborations across teams. That was basically the product. And also the other note about me first with the title, like previous to me is like it was everyone's job to basically advocate for GitHub. So like any engineer can basically go get a talk accepted and go to a conference and speak on stage or set up at a booth and give out stickers. And it was like a wonderful culture, but it was also this kind of like all over the place. Like there wasn't a rhyme or reason or why they were doing it. So I was brought in alongside of Don Goodman Wilson, who also came in like a month after me. So he was the second with the title. And we sort of just built a structure of like, okay, if everyone's already doing this, how do we build a program around getting employees to sort of also show up at events? So internally, we created this program called IRL, which is like in real life. And the goal was like get GitHub employees to show up in real life. So it's like great to do remote things. This is pre-COVID as well. So the goal is like get GitHub employees to like consistently show up and be at events and like validate communities like Java and Python and TypeScript, but like have an actual method to the madness. So that's what we did. It was great because like you didn't have to pitch GitHub. Like GitHub was already sold itself. But the game would just be like, hey, we just want to show that GitHub has real people working here. If you want to work, here's a pathway for you to do that. If you have questions around, like, I worked with the Perl team to get like the Perl. There's two different Perl teams, like Perl 5 and Perl 6, to go on GitHub because they weren't on GitHub. So there was like just a lot of like this being the sort of face for the company in different arenas. And then with GitHub Action shipping, it was also another sort of opportunity to like showcase like a new way to interact with GitHub. So I had joined really because of GraphQL, which has now been defunct, at least at GitHub. Like it's not as a valued interaction with the API. Now with AI, like REST API or GraphQL, it doesn't matter. Like just get the job done. So I did a lot of that work before, and then I started doing a lot more work around CI/CD and doing pipelines and stuff like that on GitHub and DevOps, which exposed myself into like a whole nother community I wasn't super active in. And then eventually Code Spaces, and then Copilot. Got to be part of like the first video on YouTube. I was a Copilot video. If you scroll further back, launched a TikTok as well. So it was just more of like validating GitHub in the space, but also reminding that who GitHub is. And like it's at the time our motto was home for open source. Sorry, not home for open source, home for all developers. It was the motto, but it was through the sort of the gauge of like open source and getting people engaged and using it. And like the GitHub profile README was a thing that we also launched when I was there. I got to help launch at a CodeDB conference. Yeah, a lot of stuff, but it was just like I got to learn how developers work in all different walks of life and different languages and frameworks.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, yeah, it's really fascinating. And as you're talking about that kind of career arc, like the program management side, but also the technical side, I think that's something that is so cool about how developers work, right? And right now, whether through its AI being the driver, or learning how a particular API works from a company, like developers just kind of get faced with new errors or commit messages or like all sorts of things. And I think that's what's so interesting about the space is like developers are kind of always learning. And so, as playing back what I heard is like you moved from the program management side and making the IRL program, but like along the way, you like through these product launches, you were getting more immersed in different types of development. And so, I know we actually met through the hackathon community and like kind of adjacent. So, what are your thoughts on just like the general learning arc of a developer? Like you're always being presented with new things.
Yeah, and this is like it's wow, it's even wild like today because now everything's driven through AI. So, like back in the day, like developers would have a sort of like, for example, Twilio. It's like, hey, I saw a cool thing where you could like send a text message. So like I'm gonna either go to a hackathon or watch a demo of someone sending a text message and doing a thing through Twilio or through voice or through whatever it is. And it's like you spend a lot more time sort of like intriguing developers enough to like build a little small thing and then validate that small thing could be like a full on feature at their company or be adopted and embedded as part of like the framework. But now with AI, you're like most of the stuff I'm doing is like, man, I'm just like thinking out loud and I'm just chatting with Claude and Claude's going to spin up like a branch with a prototype within like an hour. And now I have a prototype I can go validate and show to somebody and be like, hey, it works. Or should we use this? So now it's like the amount of noise that you get because you can ship so quick is overwhelming. But then we're also in a space where like a lot of developers are not reading docs anymore. Like you spend a lot of time writing docs, but you're like not writing it for developers. You're writing it for agents and for AI to like peruse and discover. So it's a different angle. And like when I was at Continue, we did do a lot of this where we wanted to make the docs discoverable through agents. We had an MCP server that if you're leveraging Continue CLI, it would just opt in already have the MCP working as a native interaction. And so if you had any questions and you like chatting with it, it could also like refer back to the docs pretty easily. So you're seeing a lot of these paradigms shift, but then also the junior experience of I don't know anything, but I could do everything. So like, how do I know anything if I could do everything? So it's like it's a weird conundrum, which I don't think I quite figured out or even know like what the path is forward. But it's just something definitely worth calling out for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like the onus is on the builder to ship something that won't break, and to do that one might need to know like system architecture or like the fundamentals of software engineering. And luckily I'm sort of in that bucket of knowing the fundamentals. Wasn't trained classically as a developer, but like a lot of folks who are just like, oh, let me build this thing and then ship it. Like I think we saw it with the Claude, the Molt book, the social network for agents,
Yeah.
that like a lot of it had, there was like a lot of security risk and agents talking to agents. I just feel like we were
Yeah.
living in a sci-fi movie already, but
I was gonna say about the whole trade classically, like I'm also like a sort of career switcher. I learned how to write code while getting my MBA. Um, so like I didn't learn like I just happened to learn how to code because I had an idea for an app while getting my MBA. And what's fascinating about this is like I don't know a ton about distributed systems or about like networking or like infrastructure, but I've definitely worked with a lot of good infrastructure and like stuff that's been properly networked and like I know like what the result looks like. So like what I've been doing is like I could chat with Claude to basically build me. Actually, my workflow is I will get to a planning mode, and then I'll create an RFC in a GitHub gist, and that RFC will be because I just want somewhere like not local. Like I just want to go read it later, like with a coffee or whatever. And I'll just have this RFC of like, okay, here's how this should work. And then what I've been doing recently is just like I share it with friends. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about building this feature. And like this is the RFC I got put together with your Claude. Like someone with more experience, take humans, come look at this and provide some feedback on this, like RFCs request for comment. And I'm finding like really good success of like getting like the dumbest ideas out there from Claude into a place that could be RFC'd, because again, I don't know what's good and bad because I haven't seen it yet. And this is like a note for juniors or early stage folks who are trying to navigate the space. I get the feedback and comment, and then I go back to Claude, like, hey, here's a feedback. Like this would actually make it solid. Let's move forward. And that's how I've been kind of really unblocking myself to push this product forward with just me and my co-founder. And my co-founder is John. He's got a ton of more experience than I do. But I don't want to like spend like a couple hours every day with him, like pairing and trying to unblock myself when he could go build all the stuff with his eyes closed. So I'm finding that's like a really good pattern, especially for folks navigating the space. In the world of AI, again, when you don't know anything, but you can do you can do everything.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So the RFC's request for comment, and you kind of bring people along and validate your ideas. And that kind of has a really interesting correlation to the way like contributing to open source works, because like before something gets like pushed to the main branch, like somebody's building a feature and then it gets like peer reviewed. And so I wanted to kind of pivot to your work on open source. So you went at with your time after, during, or on the tails of your GitHub experience, you then went to do open source. And so like what problem were you trying to solve that like open source platforms weren't really solving, or kind of the culture surrounding code? Like what did you see that gap as?
Yeah, so like my journey was I learned how to code through open source. I learned Ruby on Rails. I learned the next thing and the next thing, all through just Googling and Stack Overflow. Obviously, that world's a lot different today, as I explained. But I was at a company called Netlify. I was employee number 3, and Netlify, if you don't know, like it's a way to deploy front end websites, or the manager. Actually, I don't know what the pitch is today, but at the time it was like static driven web, deploy those as fast as possible. I got to the point where I deployed like 400 websites because I have an idea, I'd build it, I'd deploy it. And it was just constantly churning ideas. Like, and this is also what like not AI. So like I could probably spin like 1,000 websites up if I had the same sort of tenacity and ideas that were just churning to like show Netlify as a product. But what I'm getting at is like I built this one thing because I had so many open source projects. I was using so many different tools, and I wanted to manage all my PRs, all the PRs that were in flight. So I created this thing called Open Source, and it was just like it was like a CRM for my open source contributions. And I gave a talk at GitHub Universe 2017 about this because I used the GraphQL API on this. And then GitHub reached out to me after that talk to then work at GitHub about a couple months later. So like that's the story how I got to GitHub, was through this one idea at Netlify. But I kind of sat on this idea for a while because GitHub had a couple other features that kind of looked like what I was doing. They never quite shipped. So I started in 2020, before the pandemic, maybe January, I started live streaming myself building this. And then obviously the pandemic happens, and I just kept live streaming. And I started building these more features. And then what I ended up getting to the conclusion is like insights. Like the GitHub Insights was not a fully thought out product. And I wanted to build a better insights platform to like discover projects, to manage projects, to observe projects. And that's what open source became. And so I left GitHub in 2022, the end of the year, to basically go full time and build this idea out. So I spent about 27 months on that before we got acquired to the Linux Foundation.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's so interesting, like just how, yeah, going from idea to validating to building it to shipping it and having it, yeah, kind of take on a life of its own and be part of one story, your story. And so it's cool, like all those stepping stones. And I think like in technology, kind of just getting one's hands dirty, rolling up your sleeve, trying to build stuff and trying to have friends comment on it. Like it's a really good approach. And so fast forward to now, we are in this environment where like all these companies are shipping things really fast. Obviously there's these headlines of the power of this technology, who should have the power of this technology. And so, kind of like it leaves the builder who's putting things together for their quarterly review, like, what do I do? And so, what are your thoughts kind of about like how this is changing the day-to-day workflows and just kind of routine? Being in the Bay Area yourself, like the tone of the meetups is changing, the ability to ship prototypes is changing. So kind of like, what's your 2 cents on all this?
Yeah, and this is something that I get to run into all these founders that have like it's like a 1 or 2 founders, like super young, like either like pre YC, post YC. There's like all the energies in the Bay Area to like just churn out ideas and like respond to things and like watch the Twitter X like a hawk to like the next greatest thing to then apply to your product. And I feel like honestly, it's quite noisy. Like I might have hit like 3 different founders in the same week, all building the same thing, and all pivoting from the same last thing because like Anthropic built basically their product as like a side project. So like this is like a lot of noise, and I think it's super exciting, but I think what the just because of the sort of advent of like larger VC funds, everyone's got a pre-seed round that they can raise to basically build like these one-off ideas. And I was talking to a VC last week, and it's like they know not every single bet's gonna win, but they're like, if we don't bet on this, then like what if we don't win? So they have to like do a small check to basically always bet on the next thing. It is pretty much chaos and hysteria, and maybe this is like the makings of a bubble that's happening that's ready to pop. Also, OpenAI like raising $110 billion from 80% of that being from AWS and from NVIDIA, who are just going to spend it back in AWS and NVIDIA, which is like this weird circle of funding. Um, I'm just gonna say it's wild. It's wild out here, but I think my recommendation for folks is like you've got to take a break from the hype and you got to take a break from like, okay, let's ground what we're actually doing. Like right now, there's a lot of hype around sandboxes for AI sandboxes in particular. And like everyone, compute SDK is like the SDK to like compare sound, like to use all these sandboxes in one place. And it's all about milliseconds being like the speed of like uploading and stuff like that. And in reality, it's like, okay, let's take a break. Like there's tools you could use, just pick one and deploy to it and leverage it. But like the goal is that you want to either learn something, you want to build something. So focus on your building and not on constantly always trying to inject stuff into more noise into like what you're constantly doing. And this is the same thing when I did mentorships at boot camps. Like everyone would like I would teach Ruby on Rails, full stack framework. You can get something done A to Z, and you'd have like brand new developers who had never ever shipped code, but like read a blog post or saw on Twitter like that JavaScript and TypeScript, or actually even then it was just JavaScript, was like, we should be learning JavaScript because I read a blog post. I'm like, okay, well, okay, learn JavaScript. But like, what's your goal? Is your goal to learn every single new thing, or is it to like learn how to code? And a lot of times people just can't get through the hype of like, no, I was told that PHP because Facebook uses PHP at the time. I should learn that because that's what Facebook uses, and that's how I get a job at Facebook. And reality is like, sure, but like also you live in Wichita, Kansas. The chances of you getting a job in Facebook in Menlo Park is like pretty low. But you constantly always have to battle against the hype. And like for folks who don't know, but they again, they don't know anything, but they could see everything because at the time the internet was free or mostly free. Like it was free, but you were also the product. But like that was how the social revolution worked. But what I'm getting at is like today it is the same thing, but even like 100x because of AI. And like I can read a blog post or I can go see a blog post, tell it to Claude Code, and Claude Code will build me a prototype based on the blog post that I never read, which is absolutely insane. But this is what we're basically leveraging and like how the world is being moved forward. So I think all the noise, like all the stuff that you don't know anything about, that you're sort of just applying more and more to your project and your product, it will start showing, and you kind of have to start looking and reviewing code. And I'll pause there, but I've got other thoughts on like how you can combat against this. But like, yeah,
Mm.
it is a bit of a whirlwind right now.
Yeah. So there's like there's like the individual like figuring out what to build, and then the actual quality of the product itself. And it's like, okay, what is the product strategy here? Like, yes, we can chat with the AI all day and add more ideas, but like, what's the problem? What's the feature? And is it an MVP? Is it if you're adding a feature to something already in production, does it work with all the other systems? And so I definitely resonate with what you're saying. Like, just the shiny new thing is AI. And then within that, there's like a million different launches
Well,
every day.
that's the one thing is I'll mention like the reason I got to where I'm at today is because I would just write code to learn. So like when your goal is to learn, you get the learning out of it. But like I built this app called Hustling, and Hustling is basically first week I moved to the Bay Area. There's 2 baseball teams at the time, Oakland A's and the SF Giants. I don't watch baseball, but when I take the BART home and those two teams play, It's probably similar to like the I don't know if the Nets and the Yankees play, or like the White Sox and
If they compete
the
with each
Cubs.
other, yeah, I
Yeah,
think well, in New York, it's the Subway Series when the Yankees and the
exactly.
Mets play.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so we
yeah,
call it the Bay Series, which
nice,
again,
nice.
the A's have actually left, so we don't have a Bay Series anymore. Well, actually, we technically do because they're in Sacramento, but whatever. What I'm getting at is like I don't watch baseball. I wrote an app to basically text me whenever there's a baseball game, so that would just avoid the BART twice a year for the full week. I just need to like avoid the BART, and I built this not to sell it, not to become rich and like go to YC, but really just like solve a need for me. So I built it in Rails 1 year. I built an API and then piped it into Ember.js. And then the next year I built it in React. The next year I built this entire server in Go. And because baseball happens every year, I just rebuild the app in like a new tech stack. Again, not to go to YC, but just to like teach myself a new technology, but also solve the same problem I know how to solve. So I know how to scrape from ESPN.com. I know how to like get the data normalized in a way that I can like send the Twilio to send me a text message. And that was the only goal. And it'd be a weekend for me to like set up the new version before the baseball or when spring training was over to like set it up. But I think we're
Nice.
in a world where people just go straight to like $1 million idea for every single thing they generate with AI. So then every single idea looks the same. There's like this new UI that like with Shad CN, like you can kind
Hmm.
of tell when everything gets generated, it all looks the same. It's got the same
Hmm.
pills, it's got the same color palettes, and it's because like that becomes the trend of style. And
Hmm.
I guess what I'm getting at is like I think we should be okay with like generating code and never doing anything with it.
Hmm.
Like generate things to like learn, not always things to make you rich or get into YC.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely subscribe to that belief too. And it's like, if one is a lifelong learner and you just like want to try something, go for it, right? You don't have to necessarily sell it. And maybe it does strike a chord with someone, right? But you kind of have to build it out of your own motivation first. And well, everybody has different motivations. But yeah, well, that sounds cool. Yeah, in New York, the subway gets so busy with all these games. So that was very clever. So there's kind of this shiny new hype, like folks are continuing to delve into this technology. And so like how do you think it affects the actual like developer day-to-day workflows like at company like Microsoft or GitHub vis-a-vis and like kind of what's if somebody's feeling overwhelmed by the pace of AI right now, like what is one mindset or skill that you think they need to like kind of thrive in this new developers do different things now, and that's manage agents.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's 100% that. Like, I think the time is filled up with like less of us like handwriting code, and there are some things that you could just like set and let the agent run. But I think the time you spilled in that space is like you've got to. We just watched was it Block Square to basically they laid off 50% of their staff, and like I think the rumor or maybe the statement was like AI is basically scaling the rest of like this business, and like we don't need everyone we hired in 2020. But like, guess what I'm getting at is like, we don't need every engineer to have a designer. Like, we don't need every 4 engineers need one designer and one product manager. Like, engineers have to start product managing themselves, just like they're managing their agents as well. The same deal is like, if you're going to do research, you're going to deep dive. I do recommend folks at this time in this moment, like you should pick up a book and read algorithms. You should be doing like all the stuff to understand like distributed systems, things like scaling, infrastructure, like all the stuff that you wouldn't spend a lot of time because maybe you're a React dev or you're front engineer or you don't do front end, you do back end. Like web performance, if you're a back end engineer, would be super valuable because like when you think about what you're prompting, and because you know the context of like what is important, like you get further along. So like what I like to do is I'll take an agent and I'll just have it look at the last 10 commits that weren't mine and just like educate me. Give me like a sort of Q&A or give me like a quick up print up or markdown of like what happened when I was in shipping code or when code got shipped to main branch. And you should have catch up that way. And I'm like, cool. Like, okay, let's document it. Like, are the docs up to date? Like, let's go back to the docs and like update that stuff. And then you're like learning what's done and how to keep up as a human, because other humans and other agents are going to have to know this information as well. But like we're at a point where like we could ship so fast, no one's going to document it unless the agent remembers. And a lot of times that's not happening. So like I've worked with teams, I've consulted with teams in the last year where it just feels like the pace at which you could ship is so fast, but like nobody remembers that, oh, so we should probably like document or like take a breath or like report out, do release notes, like all the stuff that would just like proper hygiene around writing code. And I think those are the human touch. Actually, the best way I could sort of summarize this is like Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, about like producing music. He produced the BC Boys, but he plays no music. And the way he sort of describes this is like he has taste. He has taste of like what is good music. And I think what I'm getting at is like as an engineer, if you choose to be one, you need to have taste. And the only way to develop taste is by actually tasting code. When you develop your palate for food, you've got to go taste different cuisines and flavors and profiles. And I think that's exactly what you have to do with code today. If you want to have a fighting chance to be able to move forward and provide value.
Nice, nice. I love that. And I will say I actually have the Creative Act on my nightstand and I'm reading it right now. So
Okay,
it's
perfect.
huge, very timely, very timely. So, and then the other book you mentioned was it Designing Algorithms or was it like an O'Reilly book or something?
So Grokking Algorithms is the book that I would recommend. It's like
Grokking Algorithms.
it is a quick read, but
Mhm.
I think what's great about it is like I've been going through it, and because it's like Claude already knows the book exists, you can just be like Grokking Algorithms Chapter 3.
Mm.
Like I've completed the first 4 exercises, create me 3 more so I can
Oh,
help
cool.
solidify. And it's like one of those unlocks where I realize because the entire LM has the entire internet's history and all these books in there, which I don't know if it has books, but like it can search the web and do all the other things to like capture that. Like you could create your own learning to like level up to
Mm.
the next thing. So when I'm thinking about recursion and like when I'm thinking about like sorting and like N+1 queries, which I just fixed last week on one of my projects for tapes, that was all based on like I just knew what the prompt because I'm like, this is slow. Let's go like investigate and triage like why it's slow. Let's check for like the proper sorting and searching. And like what I discovered is like I have to go offload some of the stuff and parallelize how I'm collecting the data. So like building channels to like collect the data and stuff like that through Go are things that I know exist, but things I wouldn't think through when I'm prompting, but I will prompt it as I'm triaging later on. So then you could like build skills for the agent to then say, okay, this is a problem now. This will not be a problem in the future because I've developed a skill for you to understand this in the future.
Nice. So you're skilling up yourself, like prompting it to give you coding exercises or kind of explain concepts so that you understand them. And then as you encounter like technical issues with your agent, you're like, okay, let's like nip this in the bud and like make a doc so that like we don't run into this again. But just to kind of underscore the skill that you're suggesting is also like people just like make their own little lessons and do them.
Yeah,
I heard that correctly?
exactly. And
Nice, nice,
the thing is
nice.
like if you're a bad engineer, AI is going to make you a worse engineer.
Okay.
But if you're a good engineer, it's going to make you a great engineer because again, like
Nice.
you kind of know what you don't know when you're on the other end of the spectrum, but when you don't know what you don't know, like you're gonna
Mhm.
keep perpetuating like this like poor resolutions to like problems and like poor code output until you get to the point where you read the book or if you like skilled yourself up.
Nice. Oh, well, I think that's a great place to close out on. Do you have any thing that you'd like to share that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
No, I think a great conversation. Obviously, like we're super early on the tape side, the stereos. So papercompute.com, check it out. Papercompute.com/demo is what the demo I was alluding to earlier. And then I'm BDougie everywhere on the internet.
Nice, nice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us here on Megashift today. You all heard it first from Brian. They are building intelligent architecture for AI agents. Brian is immersed in this world of building communities around coding and dropping a lot of really great knowledge. So thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, likewise. Cheers.
All right. Take care.